This is not a piece of reporting, because the coverage, video, translation, and content collation of U.S. Vice President Pence's October 4, 2018 speech are already everywhere, readily available, and need not be repeated. Therefore, this article is purely from an analytic perspective, as well as purely personal observation, to introduce this sensational global speech. Why called it sensational? It is not because the major media around the world have covered it in detail, but because politicians in all major countries feel that their country's political and economic destiny is tied to the speech, whether they agree or not. These immediate countries include, of course, China, which is the target of the matter, and Taiwan, which would rather have nothing to happen. If I had only allowed one sentence to sum up Pence's 40-minute speech, fasten your seat belt, please. I would use the 5 words, anti-communist to rescue China. The vast majority of people would describe Mr. Pence's speech in terms such as resolute expression of America first, the declaration to contain China, and even the beginning of a new Cold War. But let me explain why such seemingly serious words are far from capturing the heavyweight nature of their content. To read the content of Pence's speech, one must show his ability to read the People's Daily. In fact, after listening to the speech, I was greatly surprised. The Americans, especially Trump, always been straightforward, call a spade a spade. And Pence's speech, if only you look at its surface content, you might think it is the news synthesis in the past few months. Inside all is the media old reports, well-known events and opinions, the new information, the new ideas. However, the depth of the speech is no less than the CCP 19 Congress reports of Xi Jinping. The murderous look and the overtones are exactly reflected in the attitude of nothing new. Just like a calm lawyer, reinforming his opponent of the evidence at hand before taking legal action. Just like a judge, reading out a complaint before a verdict. No anger. No intimidation. Just a last word before an action. Trump is accustomed to anger, but also good at intimidation. This is a characteristic of his negotiating skills, but it is also a personality defect. Therefore, this speech action, if left to Trump to carry it out, people may expect a dramatic turn in the next moment of the policy toward China. So this time, Pence's mission will be more decisive than that of Trump. Beijing has always believed that as long as Trump was impeached by domestic impeachment or the Republicans lost midterm elections, the pressure imposed by the United States on China would be eased, and the CCP would be able to change this situation via emotion and profit. But I pointed out a few months ago that Beijing had better pray that Trump would not be impeached, because the CCP is even more frightening than the Soviet Communist Party. This conclusion is already a bipartisan consensus of the United States. If Trump was impeached and then stepped down, the temperament of the legal successor, Mike Pence, is more suitable than Trump to implement the American resolve. By the way, a political giant in the U.S. who hated Trump once told me that if the Democratic Party had won at that time, Hillary would have been tougher and ruthless on China, albeit with some feminine grace in the style. Why is it defined as anti-CCP to rescue China? Pence's speech reflected 2 attributes in terms of the diction and the paragraph structures. Most people cannot notice that. In the West, in addition to the front-line politicians, even second-line politicians may not smell their taste, but Xi Jinping and his party's opponents, as long as a glance to know. As a matter of fact, anyone who is literate among the 1.4 billion Chinese people can feel who and how it goes from this speech document, as long as they have the ability to read the editorials in the People's Daily. The first attribute is anti-CCP, which refers to the Chinese Communist Party as the target, lists its guilts and issues an ultimatum. As long as the qualified CCP member has read this file about 8,000 words, Chinese translation, they will be fully aware of the attitude and reason of the United States towards China. As to whether they agree or not, the United States does not care anymore. The second attribute is rescuing China. It takes the Chinese people as the object of appeal, listing the goodwill of the United States towards China over the past 100 years. and expressing the feelings of still be rescuing China. Whether the vast Chinese people will scoff at the goodwill of Pence's speech because of loyalty to the Communist Party or based on nationalist resentment is not yet clear. The main reason for this is that Beijing has completely blocked the content of the speech. But with the spread of the hoax, we will soon see the real news and fake news reflected by the Chinese people. The dual attribute of anti-CCP to rescue China has a logical and dialectical relationship, because it wants to rescue China through anti-CCP, to oppose the CCP for the sake of rescuing China. Thus, the opening of his speech was not to enumerate the crimes of the CCP, but to show America's concern for the Chinese people in history and in the present. For example, he first said, "When China's 100 years national humiliation of humiliation and exploitation, the United States refused to join the powers and advocated the open door policy so that we could trade freely with China and retain their national sovereignty. With the advent of the Second World War, we, as allies, fought side by side to fight against imperialism. After the Second World War, the United States strived to make China as a permanent member of the United Nations, and then become an important influence in the post-war world." In this paragraph, Pence first admits the People's Republic of China's succession to the Republic of China, clearly expressed the United States' One China policy. Whether the regime ruled China is called the Qing Empire, the ROC, or the PRC, the United States only recognizes the Chinese people. Then, Pence began to acknowledge the mistakes made by the United States in its history of being friendly to China. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, we thought China was bound to become a free country. On the eve of the 21st century, with this optimism, the United States opens its door to China economically, and took China into the World Trade Organization. The decision of the former government was to hope that the freedom would spread to all corners of China. In addition to the economy, but also in the political field. It is hoped that China will regain respect for the complete concept of human rights, including the traditional principles of liberalism, private property, personal freedom and religious freedom. But all our hopes were dashed. Pence went on to express the regret of breeding the tiger. However, soon after the Communist Party came to power in 1949, it began to carry out authoritarian expansionism. In reality, China's economy depends on the United States. Over the past 17 years, China's gross domestic product (GDP) has grown 9 times, shaking itself into the world's second largest economy. This is largely due to the U.S. investment in China. The CCP also uses a range of policies that do not conform to the principles of free and fair trade, including tariffs, quotas, currency manipulation, forced technology transfers, theft of intellectual property, and the industrial subsidies. These policies have been used to build the foundations of China's manufacturing industry at the expense of its competitors, the biggest sacrifice of which is the United States. Pence also points out the use outbreak point. The CCP not only tried to change the world order, but also dared to run into the United States for United Front and destroy the national order in an all-round way. By the Made in China 2025 program, the CCP instructs government agencies and businesses to use all necessary means to obtain the intellectual property rights in the United States. Many American companies are required to surrender their trade secrets as a price for doing business in China. Beijing has coordinated and supported the acquisition of American companies to acquire their creative ownership. Worst of all, China's security agencies are behind the scenes. A comprehensive and coordinated action to undermine the president, our agenda and the support of our country's most precious ideals. The Chinese Communist government is rewarding or coercing American businesses, film studios, universities, think tanks, academics, journalists, local, state and federal officials. In order to influence American public opinion, 2018 elections and 2020 presidential elections. Locking the state and local governments and officials in the United States, and use the federal government and local government in policy differences. Compared with what China is doing all over the United States, what Russia is doing is dwarfed. Finally, Pence returned to his appeal to the Chinese people, hints at why the CCP should not exist in the Chinese land in the present state, because the centralization of power is becoming more and more fierce. Once upon a time, Beijing did move slowly towards greater freedom and greater respect for human rights. In recent years, however, China has turned sharply in the direction of controlling and oppressing its own people. By 2020, China's rulers are trying to implement the Orwellian system, the so-called social credit system, which was built on a system that almost controlled every aspect of people's lives. Religious persecution, and the issue of religious freedom. Christians, Buddhists and Muslims in China are experiencing a new wave of persecution. Throughout the Pence speech, one of the most thrilling words for Taiwanese people is, since last year, the Chinese Communist Party has persuaded 3 Latin American countries to break ties with Taipei and to recognize Beijing instead. These actions threaten the stability of the Taiwan Strait, which is condemned by the United States of America. Although our government will continue to abide by the One China policy reflected in the 3 joint communiques and the Taiwan Relations Act, the United States has always believed that the embrace of democracy by Taiwan has shown a better way for all Chinese. The CCP is not equal to China. This passage reveals again that Taiwan's position as a neutral political entity in a democratic way is the essential element of the United States' continued support for Taiwan's substantive sovereignty. Translated into vernacular, the United States needs Taiwan as an anti-communist base for the United States to demonstrate to the world, not as an anti-China people base. In the words of warning, even the United States understands that the CCP is not equal to China. Taiwan, which is related to the fate of this matter, House still cannot distinguish between China and the CCP. Taiwan is sandwiched between the use and China game. At this time, the best Taiwan policy for the United States should be no falling behind the queue, no jumping the queue, to follow the space provided by the United States for Taiwan to strive for any opportunity to strengthen Taiwan's real sovereignty, but not to create confusion for the United States and become a troublemaker. The best Taiwan policy for the PRC should be to distinguish the China and the CCP. Should be to distinguish China from the Chinese Communist Party, to release a great deal of goodwill towards the Chinese people, so that the world will know that Taiwan society is mature and that the CCP is not equal to China, just as Taiwan has learned that the KMT is not equal to Taiwan, and the DPP also is not equal to Taiwan. Taiwan is belong to the citizen of Taiwan, not belong to any political party. In this way, it echoes the words of Pence incorrectly. Taiwan's embrace of democracy has shown a better way for all Chinese. Pence's mission provided China with a way out, set a stage for Taiwan, and hinted at the organic link between the way out and the stage. If Taiwan could not see this, it would be said that the height and tolerance were not enough.